In 2016, British voters went to the polls and made a choice that tore families apart and dominated street arguments. They voted to leave the European Union by a razor-thin margin, 52% to 48%. Citizens accepted a specific trade-off. They chose to walk away from deep economic integration with their European neighbors in exchange for complete domestic control over their regulations, their trade policy, and their immigration system. Curious, this visualization shows the national sentiment today, a decade later. The public mood has shifted significantly. Now, over 60% of UK citizens wish to rejoin the EU, a bloc including many who originally voted to leave. Yet despite a clear consensus demanding a return, that public energy is not reflected in the current business of government. Even with a strong polling majority, rejoining the EU remains absent from the active parliamentary agenda. The United Kingdom finds itself in a democratic stalemate. The collective desire of the citizens is clear, but the country appears unable to translate that desire into geopolitical reality. Back during the referendum, some warnings suggested that an exit vote would trigger an immediate, fiery economic collapse. That sudden crash never materialized. This chart maps the reality of the situation, a gradual drag on the economy. By comparing the UK's actual performance against its projected baseline if it had stayed in the EU, we see a slow suffocation of growth that compounds over a decade, resulting in a 6 to 8% reduction in total GDP. As we expand this data to track other metrics, the secondary hits become obvious. Long-term commercial confidence slowed, driving a 12% drop in business investment and a 15% reduction in overall trade volume. Some companies managed to adapt. Large corporations had the capital to absorb the costs of new customs checks and the extra administrative work required to prove exactly where their goods were manufactured. But smaller exporters simply didn't have those cash reserves. Those identical regulatory barriers effectively removed them from the European market. At the same time, highly lucrative, regulated service industries, like finance and law, lost their automatic rights to operate within the European single market, which had previously allowed them to sell services seamlessly across borders. Productivity growth relies heavily on constant investment. When that flow of capital slowed for a sustained period, the nation's overall productive capacity stalled. 10 years of lagging investment and lower trade intensity ultimately shifted the national consensus. A decade ago, the British political scene was highly stable, dominated almost entirely by two major forces, the Tories and the Labour Party. Today, that stability is gone. The landscape is now fractured into a multitude of localized, highly specific political factions. The ballots are crowded with groups like Reform UK, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the Scottish National Party, and dozens of independent candidates. This flowchart highlights a contradiction at the ballot box. A citizen might openly state they want to rejoin the EU, but when election day arrives, they cast their local vote for hardline, anti-EU factions like Reform UK to handle regional issues. The legal mechanics of rejoining the European Union are incredibly complex. Negotiating a return requires a level of unified national political will and a clear governing mandate that the current system is struggling to produce. The rise of these localized factions means that a 60% majority in the polls does not automatically create a 60% majority in Parliament. This distribution of votes across half a dozen parties prevents the public will from easily becoming a unified legal mandate. The UK government is currently trying to apply band-aids to the economic damage. They recently secured the 2025 Common Understanding, a targeted agreement designed to ease frictions on agricultural and food trade. But these isolated sector-by-sector deals fall short. They ease minor logistical headaches, but they fail to replicate the raw economic value of full, frictionless participation in the single market. The struggle isn't entirely one-sided. By severing ties, the European Union is dealing with its own strategic detriments. This image shows military personnel coordinating logistics in a cargo plane, a reminder of what the EU lost. They no longer have automatic access to the United Kingdom's massive, highly developed national defense capabilities, requiring separate political negotiations for joint military support. The EU also lost a crucial internal balancing weight: British Euroscepticism. For decades, the UK's skepticism provided a realism that kept EU policies grounded during tense negotiations between member countries. If the EU ever hopes to rebuild trust and welcome those citizens back, it has to move past a stance perceived as punishing and adopt a more flexible, open approach. A geopolitical divorce of this magnitude cannot be fixed by public sentiment alone. Until the British electorate aligns its broad national desires with its local voting habits, the country will remain stuck in the dark.